Hi. These two haven't seen each other in 20 years, and now they're dodging bullets and saving the world together. Want to know how it happened? You're about to find out. But first, let's go back to 1996. We're in the boys' locker room in a high school. Some fat guy is dancing in the shower. His giggling classmates are watching him. Meanwhile, the school gym is hosting the Student of the Year award. Local popular kid Calvin Joyner, better known as the Golden Jet, is invited to get the award. As he addresses the crowd, he begins his motivational speech. But his TED Talk is interrupted by a strange incident. The fat guy is kicked out of the shower into the gym completely naked. The people start laughing and Calvin feels sorry for the poor guy. He gives him his varsity jacket and helps him cover up. Transition to our days. Calvin is no longer everyone's favorite guy. He works in an office, watches with envy how his colleagues get promoted, puts up with the stupid jokes of his open space colleague. He married his high school sweetheart, Maggie. During dinner with his wife, Calvin says that he doesn't want to go to the college reunion planned in a few days. Maggie's unhappy about this. She took her time preparing for this and chose a beautiful dress. Her husband confesses to her that he isn't ready for the questions about his job. After all, everyone expected him to at least get a position of a governor, whereas he became a simple accountant.
I had no idea that your life with me was such a soundless, crashing disappointment.
The next day, Calvin scrolls through his social feed. Suddenly he notices that same Bob Stone sent him a friend request. Calvin has no idea who that is, but accepts the request. Bob promptly invites him over for a beer. Calvin asks him how they know each other, and he realizes that this is the outcast from high school. He's speechless. Calvin immediately agrees to meet him.
Hey.
Calvin simply can't believe this big guy in front of him is the same Robbie that used to be a laughingstock of the entire high school. The guys sit down to have a beer, chat and have some fun. After a while, Bob goes to the bar and gets a few more beers, and the dude on the left tries to take his chair. Calvin tries to politely explain to the stranger that the seat is taken, but he just makes things worse. Bob returns and quickly gets things sorted out. Calvin is shocked by what he just witnessed. Bob invites him to ride a bike together, and they drive to the high school. While Calvin relives pleasant memories, Bob feels rather sad. He confides in his new friend and says that since that evening, he has never undressed in front of another person. But suddenly, they notice a showcase dedicated to the graduates of the 96th year. It looks like an altar of Calvin's achievements. A bunch of trophies, photos, and certificates, but Calvin isn't happy about all of this.
If 18-year-old me could see me now, he'd probably think I was a total loser.
Frustrated, he returns home and says goodbye to Bob. However, he's in no hurry to say bye to his new friend. Bob explains that he recently had some trouble with his payroll. He says he could use Calvin's professional skills and invites himself to his place. They can't figure out the bills because Bob spills beer on Calvin's laptop. He asks if he could stay for the night, and indeed stays, sleeping on the couch. In the morning, Calvin comes downstairs to the kitchen and hears a knock on the door. The woman at the door introduces herself as a CIA agent.
Have you had any contact with this man?
Calvin immediately betrays Bob, but the big guy is already gone. Officer Harris tells Calvin that Bob is wanted for murder and treason. Calvin begins to realize that things are getting pretty intense and relinquishes his friendship with Bob. However, the fugitive indicated him as the only contact in case of an emergency. Officer Harris informs Calvin that he'll have to act as bait from now on and follows him to the office. Once in the office, Calvin immediately hears the phone ringing. That's Bob calling. He says he's in trouble and asks to urgently meet him on the stairs in the office. The CIA team runs to the designated location, but Bob outsmarts them. Calvin demands to know what's going on here, but Bob doesn't say anything. He hands his friend a gun and for some reason sets fire to a tie hanging from the ceiling. Calvin then runs out of the office and screams. There's an intense shootout, but Bob incapacitates almost all of his pursuers. Bob and Calvin almost escape the law enforcement officers, but at the elevators, they're stopped by a CIA team. Bob buys some time with polite conversation, and then...
My time is up. In 3, 2, 1.
The office is in total chaos, and Bob takes this opportunity to escape. The big guy shoots through the panoramic window, jumps down with Calvin, and lands on top of an inflatable gorilla. In the car, Bob finally explains to his friend what's going on. According to him, 3 weeks ago, a criminal known as the Black Badger stole the keys to the American spyware and is now going to sell them to the highest bidder at the auction. But Calvin won't even listen. He has to slow down and says he doesn't want to be part of it because Bob is a criminal. Bob tells him the truth. Bob and his partner Phil almost made it to the Black Badger's lair. But when they were close to their goal, Phil got stuck in an elevator with a bomb and died. Bob failed to catch the criminal, and Phil's death was blamed on him. Calvin feels sorry for his friend, but still begs to let him go home. Then Bob breaks it down to him. Officer Harris must have already gotten Calvin's house under 24-hour surveillance, and now he's part of the mission, whether he wants to be or not. But their conversation is interrupted by an unexpected visitor.
Get down, sir!
While Bob is taking care of an intruder, Calvin steals his bike. He calls his wife and asks her not to go home, but to meet him in the office of their new marriage counselor. But on the way, he's interrupted by Officer Harris. She convinces Calvin that Bob's mental breakdown is progressing, and he's actually the Black Badger. Calvin begins to trust the woman and accepts the alert device from her, which he needs to activate when he meets Bob. Calvin is late for the marriage counseling session.
Hello, Calvin. Hey.
Not to put Maggie at risk, Calvin calms down and pretends he doesn't know Bob. They fool around playing associations and role-playing games. But Calvin can't stand it anymore and loses his temper. The wife gets angry with him and leaves. Calvin almost activates the device, but Bob reassures him. He tells him that he doesn't have any codes. To find them, he needs Calvin's help. Oddly enough, Calvin believes him and takes him to his friend, a specialist in international transactions. This friend turns out to be Trevor, who embarrassed Bob in front of the entire high school 20 years ago. Trevor quickly gives the guys a transaction number and is very polite at first. He even apologizes for what he's done. But it soon becomes clear that this is just another prank. He hasn't changed one bit. Calvin is sure that Bob will now teach his old bully a lesson, but he seems to be frozen. He just silently leaves the office. Calvin follows him out of the office and receives a call from Harris. She demands to know his location and keep Bob there until a team arrives. Outside, Bob tells Calvin that he was the only one who didn't bully him. That's why he's the only friend he can trust. At this point, Calvin admits that he just turned Bob into the CIA. Harris interrogates Bob, but the man wouldn't speak. Then she orders to bring torture instruments. And Calvin, meanwhile, comes up with a plan to distract the guards.
What the hell?
Calvin gets the keys and gets into the interrogation room. The partners chain Harris to the table and run away. Bob asks if Calvin still has the transaction numbers. It turns out that these are coordinates of the place where the deal is about to happen. The friends enter the coordinates into a burner phone and find out that the deal is happening in Boston. The partners go to a private airfield and search for an aircraft. While Calvin distracts the local security guard, Bob prepares the plane for flight. The friends finally arrive at the place. Calvin is concerned that the place where the deal is supposed to happen is in plain sight. He notices the entrance to an underground parking lot nearby and says that the meeting will most likely happen there. Bob commends him for his quick wits and suggests they split up. In the parking lot, Bob sees a bunch of men, led by a client. Meanwhile, Calvin spots Harris at the entrance of the parking lot and decides that she must be the Black Badger. He tries to call Bob, but he doesn't pick up the phone. Calvin runs to the parking lot to warn his friend. But after shooting his partner, Bob takes out a flash drive from his pocket. Suddenly, Phil comes out from behind a pillar. The supposedly dead man declares that he is the Black Badger, and he has the codes. The client is impatient. He demands to hand him over both flash drives. The former partner throws the drives on the floor when suddenly a CIA team bursts into the parking lot. A tough fight ensues. Calvin, who has already managed to recover, picks up the flash drive from the floor and runs away. The client in the car almost catches up to him, but Bob saves his friend just in time. But Calvin doesn't want to hear it. He runs away to the bridge nearby. He's not alone for long. Soon, Bob is on his left and Phil is on his right. Each of them begs Calvin to believe him. Bob and Phil start shooting at each other. Phil loses his weapon and Calvin picks it up. Whether out of negligence or out of resentment, Calvin shoots Bob, and Phil asks the guy to hand him over the codes. Calvin tries to shoot him too, but the gun's empty. Finally, the truth is revealed. Phil says that Bob could never be the Black Badger because he's a sentimental weakling. Unlike Phil, who's a smart guy. He faked his death and fooled everyone. On the verge of death, Calvin decides to pull off his signature move. This is enough to distract Phil. Bob uses the moment and kicks him off the building. The buddies ask each other for forgiveness. hand over the codes to Harris, and head off to the reunion party. The guys arrive at the party in a helicopter. Calvin introduces Maggie to Bob and apologizes to her for not appreciating the simple happiness next to his beloved. The three of them enter the gym, where they're about to announce the names of the prom king and queen. Bob panics and nearly runs away, but Calvin stops him. He hacked into the voting system and secured the victory for Bob. Bob walks out of the crowd to a round of applause. On the way, he sees Trevor, who again begins to make fun of him. But this time, the big guy is no longer afraid of him. He knocks him out with a single punch and gets onto the stage. Bob says that 20 years ago, he stood here helpless, and everyone laughed at him. But now, things are different. He has a best friend who taught Bob not to be afraid to be himself. To the shock of everyone present, the guy rips off his clothes and stands completely naked in front of everyone. Several months pass. Bob waits for Calvin outside while he says goodbye to his pregnant wife. He came to give his friend a memento from the past and support him before his first day at work for the CIA.
Bob, is that my jacket? Yes! No, wait a minute, yes!
Do you have any stories about friendship that rekindled after many years of being apart? Share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel to learn about cool movies without wasting your precious time.